by the way of India's GDP growth in the third quarter of financial year 2024, beating all estimates, coming in at 8.4%. With me is my colleague Krishnakumar. Krishna, we were discussing on the show yesterday in the evening, right before those numbers came out, the expectation was anywhere sub 7%, 6.7 to 6.9, 8.4 is unthinkable.
Yes, it has beaten everybody's expectations, and everybody's expectations by a mile. You're talking about beating expectations by nearly 2%, and that's big deal for as far as GDP growth rates are concerned. And the reasons behind this kind of growth being given for the December quarter, where there were many issues. One was in terms of government spending, not much going up, an irregular monsoon, an uneven monsoon. There are even more reasons as to why those predictions existed in the first place. But what has happened for this number, for us to have it at 8.4%, which is a phenomenal number for the December quarter, are two things. One is exemplary growth in the manufacturing sector of India, and two is the construction sector of India. Manufacturing sector of India growing in excess of 11% during the quarter, and construction sector too growing close to 10%. So nearly double-digit growth in both manufacturing and construction is what is the primary reasons, the pillars upon which we have these 8.4% numbers. And based on these numbers, the National Statistical Organization, or NSO of India, has also revised the yearly GDP figures as well.
I was just about to come to that. So, right before the numbers came out yesterday, the predictions were that GDP for financial year 24 will be anywhere to the tune of 7 to 7.3%. That has now also been upped to a whopping 7.6%.
Right. So clearly there is a recalibration of numbers based on what is happening in this quarter and what will happen going forward. What we also have to understand is the fact that spending, consumer spending, private consumption was also up over 3% during the quarter, and despite the fact that you have a contraction in government's capital expenditure by over 3%, you have consumption story driving this growth, which is very good news for India. The only question is how much, many economists saying the fact that there is something called as GVA, or gross value added, which is coming at 6.5%. Now, with gross value added at 6.5%, and governments, both the capital expenditure and revenue expenditure, not really seeing a substantial growth, it's unsustainable. This kind of 8.4% number is unsustainable. And coupled with the fact that your core sector growth data, which came out alongside GDP numbers, have also not been great.
Absolutely. So I want to come to these sectors specifically. I think that important diagram, which was, and the chart that was on the screens at this point, which basically goes on to reaffirm what Krishna also said here, that manufacturing and construction, a double-digit growth in these two sectors is the reason why the economic activity for the third quarter has been buoyant. Agriculture has been a dampener at a negative of 0.8%.
Right, and that was expected, because that's the reasons why the overall GDP figure was expected low, because it was irregular monsoon and agricultural output was expected to be low. So there is no surprise on that front that the agricultural output is low. What is surprising is the kind of growth that manufacturing and construction together have put up, and also more importantly, private consumption. Private consumption putting up plus 3% growth, and that is sort of sustaining the economy. And bear in mind, India is a consumption-driven economy. Indian economy's story is going to be about how much we can drive consumption going forward as well. So in a quarter in which your agriculture is going to take you backwards, if manufacturing, construction, and private consumption can pull your GDP numbers upwards, that's the kind of future that we're looking at as far as India's GDP number is concerned.
And services, they're also not a big dampener, growing marginally at 1% from 6% in the last year, quarter 2 of financial year 24, to about 7% in third quarter of financial year 24. I think in all of this, also important to mention, you were coming to the core sector. The growth in the core sectors at about 3.4% is not exceptionally good, but rightly pointed out that it's just manufacturing and construction which have propped up these numbers. Is this sustainable? What are we reading?
Most economists, I'm not the economist here, Shweta.
So that's why, what are we reading? What are the economists saying?
So exactly. So I was just telling you that, like, from whatever I've read about what economists have to say, some of the foremost and senior most economists in this country who are neither pessimistic nor optimistic about India's economy, are realistic about India's economy, if you were to listen to what they have to say, and they're saying the same thing. This quarterly number might not be sustainable.
Right.
But what is clear is the overall growth trajectory of India, and that remains in the right direction. So there is nothing to worry as far as the overall growth trajectory of India is concerned. But what you should not expect going forward is that quarter after quarter India is going to be putting up 8.4, 8.5, 9% growth rate, and that's not going to happen. But the fact of the matter is that even if, for example, hypothetically speaking, if we did put up a growth rate of sub 7%, less than 7% in the December quarter, we still remain the fastest growing large economy in the world. And we're at 7.3% growth rate, which is the original growth rate was for the financial year, we are the fastest growing large economy in the world. And with that number being up to 7.3 to 7.6%, it is definitely India shoring up its GDP growth rate over a period of time, over a financial year. So what we need to understand is that, as I always say, that's because of what I've heard RBI Governor Shaktikanta Das say, is that we are in a situation where we should not take quarterly GDP numbers too seriously. Right. In fact, quarterly data per se too seriously. We should take it with a pinch of salt, a big pinch of salt, if not a bucket of salt. All these quarterly data numbers, we'll have to see how it averages out over quarters and over financial years. Bear in mind, we are in that recovery phase from pandemic. So we are sort of stabilizing our GDP growth rate, because we can't have the kind of government spending that we had during the pandemic days. So the government spending will contract, will stabilize, will come down. The point is, even as government spending stabilizes, how better growth rates if we can put up, if we can push it up from 7.0 to 7.6, that in itself is very good news as far as India's economy is concerned.
And even though a sectoral growth rate of 8.4% doesn't look like too big, if it cannot be sustained quarter on quarter, anyway, it has in a way propped up India's financial year growth prospects to about 7.6% from 7.3%. That is a big deal in itself. Now, if that growth momentum were to continue into the fourth quarter, we are looking at just around 8% growth rate. As you rightly said, this is the fastest growing major economy in the world, and it is on a sustained growth path. Now, going forward, Krishna, I think it's also important to point out to our viewers that this has come on the back of the fact that capex has been relatively low. The capex has picked up in the last quarter. We are just around elections, lots of doles on offer, and government is also taking some proactive measures to ensure inflation is curtailed. So be it by the way of that LPG subsidy to subsidy in food grains, so on and so forth, which will essentially ensure that there's more consumption in the fourth quarter, the ongoing quarter, and that there's more government spending as well. While private spending hasn't really kicked off just as yet, may just happen after elections. Fourth quarter is expected to be better.
Yes, definitely, and we are hoping at a stage where our gross value added, which is the GVA number, and the GDP number have more congruence than they do at this point in time for this quarter, because the gross value added is just 6.5%, whereas the GDP number is at 8.4%, which also many economists feel is very odd, and that certainly is not sustainable. Absolutely. So we, ideally speaking, from next quarter onwards, these two numbers find some congruence. We see more private sector spending kicking off, with the finality of the elections coming through, and also with the government and the stability of the government set to continue, there'll be more government spending going forward, is the hope. Also, we won't be impacted by the factors like an irregular monsoon and other factors that was supposed to affect the data this time around. But the good news is that the word I would take from these numbers is resilience. Yes, we are also, bear in mind, even we had the CEA, Chief Economic Advisor to the Prime Minister, talking about the fact that India, despite this 8.4%, is exposed to global risks. What's happening in the global economy? Those risks don't go away. So those, even in the next quarter, even if the number is better, those risks continue to exist quarter after quarter. The answer to those risks is whether India can prop up its own consumption story to mitigate all the risks, both domestic and global.
And hopefully private investment will also start kicking in. Comes financial year 2025, which is just around the corner. It is expected that private players will also start participating in India's growth story. But for now, India's growth projected to be at 7.6%. Those are some of the advanced revised estimates on the basis of the third quarter growth, which is coming at 8.4%, surprising almost everybody on the street.